their dreams and not the dreams that we create for them. I think it's important that they are able to identify the things they're interested in, but even more importantly, sometimes it's good for them to be able to identify the things they're not interested in. And I think their school experience should give them those types of observations. From a fiscal standpoint, I've dealt with budgets from anywhere between, I'd say when I was in Prince William, I had a budget of my area, if you will, that was about 180 million there. I currently have a budget that's about 80 million in Reynoldsburg that's grown substantially over the last couple of years. I also know I've been able to work with a diverse group of people throughout that entire process. I never look at this role as if I'm the most important person in the room, because I'm not. There is no most important person in the room. We all have roles to fulfill, and philosophically, that's how I look at this role. So therefore, it's important to depend on people to fulfill their roles in the most salient fashion that allows everyone to be successful.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm the other Brown on the panel tonight. Welcome, Dr. Brown. I am Cassandra Brown, and I represent District 4 for the Montgomery County School Board. And I would like to just discuss with you this evening on what is your experience on facility management and construction. And I'll just take it a little further, because we are talking a lot about that here in our school district, and we would like to know what would be your approach in taking our leadership to handle these large projects that are up and coming in our system.
Very good. I think in terms of the decision-making process and things of that nature, that is the responsibility of the boards. It would be my responsibility to give as much information and guidance in the process as I possibly can, so the board can make informed decisions. My experience, when I was in Virginia, I worked in a district that was growing exponentially every year, so we were building schools every single year. In my area, we built 4 schools over the course of my 2 years as associate superintendent there, and I was responsible for those projects and how they were implemented. I was also responsible for how I integrated with the community to make sure the community was part of the process in terms of building design, building name, what was going to go into the buildings and things of that nature. So I've been accustomed to that process. Ohio is a little bit different from Virginia in that Virginia is very similar to Alabama in terms of having a county-based system. Ohio is a local-based system, so we're smaller in that regard while still holding the same types of responsibilities. We've not done a new construction project in Reynoldsburg since I've been there, but we have upgraded the current buildings with new construction. So for example, we have 2 high school campuses. One is the Livingston campus, one is the Summit campus. The Summit is a brand new school that was built 8 years ago. Far better resource than the old building, the Livingston campus. So when I came in 4 years ago, my responsibility was to try to create some equity between the 2 buildings. So we initiated a $2.5 million project just for that building 3 summers ago to make some equitable change there that would give kids a space that they could be proud of, that represented the work we wanted them to do, and it gave them something they could have as a badge of honor that didn't necessarily say your school is lesser than this one. We didn't want to give that impression, so we put a lot of resources into that building to give it some more oomph, if you will. We also inherited in 2017, I was 1 week into my tenure as superintendent, and we discovered a huge issue with our HVAC system, to the tune of the fact that we were going to have 3 buildings that would have not been allowed to open once the winter months came. And if you know Ohio, we get some pretty cold winter months. That system was going to fail us. So within 6 weeks, we created a plan, got funding, and were able to change the entire HVAC system for our entire district over the course of that 3 to 4 months before the winter months came into play. That saved us a lot of time, and honestly, in the long run, it's going to save us money. We've, up to this point, that was 4 years ago, we've saved roughly, I would say roughly $2.5 million just in energy costs alone based on that one project.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Brown.
Good evening.
I'm Erica Watkins-Smith, board member representing District 7. My question to you this evening is for you to describe your management style and the methods you have found to be the most effective in supervision and building rapport with administrators and employees.
Very good, thank you. My management style has always been collaborative. I want everyone at the table to be part of the decision-making process. I want them to have a voice when we're having discussions about whatever it is that we need to do. And when we can have conversations and haggle over issues and questions, I think that gives us an opportunity to find the holes in whatever issue we might put on the table so we can make sure we don't make mistakes in that process. I like good discourse at the table, and I want people to be able to have honest opinions about issues that we confront. When I'm wrong, I want one of my team members to tell me so. That's why they're there. If I had all the answers, then perhaps I would be doing something very different than what I currently do. It's important to have a team that's able to do that. My current executive team, we meet 4 different times throughout, we have 4 different types of meetings that we run. Daily, we have a daily huddle where we check on each other each day, first thing in the morning, to make sure we're all in the places where we need to be and finding ways we can support each other. We meet weekly in our weekly tactical meetings to talk about the things for that week that we need to deploy and react to immediately. We have a strategic monthly meeting where we have long-term strategic ideas that we need to put on the table that may be implemented months from now, may be something that we're going to implement even 2 to 3 years from now. And then we have a quarterly off-site review where we go off-site, we look back on the quarter to see the things that we've done well, the things we haven't done so well, and we can build on that. Within the continuum also, we have monthly principals meetings where we talk about the issues that they're confronting at the building level. We then split those into our elementary and secondary principals where we can talk about things that are specific to them. I think it's important in this role, in this seat, that I'm in touch with them on a regular basis, that they see me on a regular basis, and sometimes they need to see me in ways that aren't necessarily evaluative. I just need to be there as a support mechanism for them, so they know when they have issues to confront that we're going to be there to support them. That needs to be my role, and I need to be very visible in that respect. So when if I'm going to visit a building, back home, they know nothing shuts down, nothing changes. It all remains the same when I walk in the building. I don't want to see the dog and pony show. I want to see the real everyday activities that happen in school so we can find ways to address any deficiencies we might have or celebrate any victories we might have. So that work continues. I'd like to be a person who's visible in that regard, but also very purposeful in how I go into classrooms and interface with teachers. When I go into classrooms, I want to talk with kids. If kids can tell me what they're working on, what their objectives are, how it benefits them, how it's going to help them fulfill their dreams and goals, then I know that that instructional method is working. So in terms of accountability, I think from a visible standpoint, that's very helpful. But also, obviously using the evaluation process to determine who's doing well and who's not. And then using numbers of types of data, bunches of data points, not just test scores. Test scores tell us one thing, but perhaps we need to go deeper in looking at what those test scores tell us, or how we're using our value-added data to show how a teacher may have a struggling class who's had tremendous growth in a particular year working with that particular teacher. That person needs to be rewarded for that work. So using numerous data points to give us information to help us make good decisions about who's doing well. With my senior team, obviously I talked about the 4 meetings we have as a group. I also meet with each of them individually on a weekly basis to talk about the things that they're struggling with in their particular departments and how I can better support them, or where we can find operations of support, where we can find other resources. Those conversations have gleaned a lot of ideas about how we can partner with our community college system, with our university system, with our business partners to make sure they're part of the process as well. So I want to be as open as possible in terms of allowing people to have a voice. Something that also gets lost in that sometimes is student voice. How do we capture that to make sure kids have a voice at the table? I have a student advisory council that meets monthly, and they give me really good ideas about what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well. I need their views, because a lot of times we'll sit back and say, well, we know kids need X, Y, and Z, but we never really ask the kids what they need. I think that's important for them to tell us that and give us their voice as well. I look forward to next year, wherever I might be it here or still back home, how we integrate student voice even more so in decision-making processes. So that gives me a good understanding of what happens at the kid level to help us improve what we do with the adults.
I have a follow-up
Sure.
question, and it's related to this question in support. What does the support look like for teachers, and is there a teacher advisory committee that you also meet with?
Yes. So support for teachers, we'll start with professional development. We have a ton of different professional development opportunities for teachers to either have as mandatory sessions or optional sessions. That happens all the time. But in terms of having voices at the table. We do have a staff advisory council. I do that on the classified side and on the certified side, so they all have a voice. Union presidents there I have a really good relationship with as well. I'm surprised I don't have a text from one of them tonight asking me to blow this interview so I can come back home. But we have a relationship in that regard. So if the union president has a concern, she knows she can just text me. We don't need to have a long, drawn out argument over an issue. We can just talk about it and get to the heart of it. So we've been able to solve a lot of problems together. I believe in healthy discourse where we can agree to disagree and do so agreeably, and moving on to find solutions that help everybody, with the bottom line being, how does it impact kids? If it impacts kids in a negative way, then that's not the road we should be taking. If we can create a situation that makes adults more comfortable while helping kids to be comfortable, then that's a solution that we might want to look at. So we're very open in that regard to have those types of conversations, understanding that the student is number one as far as what happens in classrooms.
Thank you.
Good evening again.
Hi.
My name again is Brenda Coleman. I am the board representative for District 3. And we have, I've heard you talk about achievement. And I'd like to say that we understand eliminating achievement gaps is something that's been widely discussed and debated. I've been told, don't even use that term anymore. As a professional educator, I do recognize that learners have varying abilities. What are your expectations for student achievement, and what approaches would you pursue to narrow gaps as they relate to gender, race, and socioeconomic disparities?
Well, first, we talk about the achievement gap from time to time, but we talk a lot more about the opportunity gap and the fact that many times in school districts, we create structures that prevent kids from accessing certain programs and resources. So how do we work to eliminate those types of things, those barriers that we create? At the same time, there are certain kids that come to school with certain advantages that others don't. So how do we level the playing field to make sure equity is at the heart of what we're trying to get accomplished? How do we resource appropriately so the student on one side of the district is getting the same types of opportunities as the student on the other side of the district? How do we look at schools, be they newer or older, to make sure they're resourced appropriately based on what kids need, not necessarily what that building is supposed to get, so to speak. So I think that's where the conversations start. I firmly believe that if you change classroom conditions, test scores take care of themselves. If kids have a sense of connectedness and belonging when they come to school every day, and they can see themselves in the curriculum, they can see themselves in how the school, how the instruction is brought about, they can see that people care about them, they're going to perform better academically. And those test scores are going to raise in that regard. I've always talked about the fact that you don't raise test scores by simply saying we're going to raise test scores. It takes much more than that. And if you don't change climate and culture to make those things happen, those test scores don't happen. So I'm a big believer in making sure kids come to school and have a place where they enjoy coming. They may not always enjoy the work. That's part of the work, so to speak. But they should always have something that they're interested in that draws them to school every day. Maybe it's that one student who is a marginal academic student, but flourishes in band, let's say. How is he accessing that resource? Or maybe it's that student who is a great science student who socially struggles with certain things. How do we help her get to the point where she can overcome those issues, and what kinds of resources can we put in front of her? So when it comes to how we get to results, those are the baseline things I would like us to take care of first, and then we can start talking about what test scores look like. How do we look at how many girls are in STEM programs versus boys? Traditionally in America, boys are typically funneled into those programs more so than girls. How do we alleviate that issue and give girls just as much access? In any situation, we've got to assess what's on the table and how things have been structured to determine how we're going to raise those test scores. To me, the test scores are the end game. That's where we want to get to. That doesn't necessarily begin where you start in terms of addressing what those issues are. We got to look kid by kid, group by group, to make sure we're giving them whatever resources they might need. Just for the sake of the conversation, I'm one of those kids. I was raised by a single parent, a single mom in Virginia. I was raised in a trailer with no running water until I was 16. There were people in school who saw something in me and pushed me and had high expectations for me. Even when I was failing to meet those, they still held those expectations for me. That's what needs to happen in schools. We need every student to have somebody like that who's going to hold them accountable in that regard and saying, you are wonderful, you are spectacular, you are brilliant and special, and we're going to make sure you reach your potential. Regardless of what circumstances, what obstacles, what hindrances might be in their way, kids need to hear that. I'll tell one other quick story. When I was applying to college in high school, my high school guidance counselor told me, well, Melvin, you know, I don't know if you'll do well at James Madison University. You probably should not apply there. Because I had some teachers in my life and some administrators in my life who gave me a sense of confidence, I was able to tell her, I don't need your permission, I just need your signature. 4 years later, when I graduated from JMU, where did I end up going? Right back to my high school to say, I did pretty well there. Those are the types of things we can't say to kids. We can't tell them what they can't do. We need to encourage them to do things that they want to do. And if they want to play in the NBA, let's just say that's their goal. Great, let's work toward that. What is your backup plan? How do we make sure you're taken care of? And there's a safety net, so to speak, to help you fall where you need to fall. So I think when it comes to accountability, those are the things that drive test scores. Changing school culture does that.
Okay, thank you. And looking at the fact that we are looking for a new superintendent, when a new superintendent is hired, we want to make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible for everyone involved. How would you help both the educational community and our community at large to adjust to the new governing style that comes with new leadership?
I think from the very beginning, if I'm the fortunate candidate to be selected, my first 100 or so days, I need to simply shut up and listen. I need to have conversations with people to get their perspectives on issues, to get their view of what's going well and what's not going so well, to get a sense of what the totality of programs look like and who's struggling and who's not. I need to have an ear to everyone, be it people within the front office, at central office, or business community. We talked earlier today with the Chamber of Commerce. I need to be able to have those folks in my ear so I can get an understanding of what this all should look like. Any superintendent coming in, and I need to talk with the current superintendent as well, so that transition can look smooth. Any new superintendent coming to a situation in a school district who says from day one, it's going to be my way, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, is making a big mistake, because you have an opportunity to capitalize on the work that's already been done. Here, there's a very strong foundation that's been established, and to ignore that would be a huge mistake. You have to be able to use that foundation to catapult to where it wants to go, and you build upon what's already been put in place. So I think from any standpoint, my leadership style is going to come across in those conversations, and people understanding that I'm not the type to come in and just want to change everything. I have ideas about things, but I also need to get other perspectives, because my ideas could be off. I could have a false reading on something, and having those conversations gives me an opportunity to have a real understanding of what is actual and what might not be so actual, and give other people an opportunity to have voice at the table as well, because no one person is going to change or revolutionize a district on his or her own. There are groups of people that have to be part of that process, and that takes everyone.
Thank you for that answer. And you did mention that you have spoken with the chamber. But what about the rest of the community? Education community, I think we've heard, and the conversations today with the chamber.
Right.
But the community at large.
Absolutely. I think it's important to recognize that a lot of times our parents have not had good experiences in schools themselves. What do we do to change that? They may be reluctant to come to school for those reasons. So perhaps we need to go to them. Perhaps we need to go in people's homes, the front porches and backyards, churches, and have conversations with them in places that they're comfortable, so they understand that now school is a comfortable place for them as well. I think traditionally in schools, we've often just said, okay, we'll have a program and we invite people to come. Not everybody's comfortable coming. So how do we create this situation where they might be comfortable coming? Well, it'd be easier if we take it to them. So I would want to be very visible in that regard and make sure I'm meeting with as many people as possible to get perspectives on what the community's needs are, what its issues are, what its desires are. We can be solitary as a school district and create goals and objectives from within, But there may be people on the outside that are part of the community who want to be part of that process. How do we ingratiate that opportunity to partner and give them a voice at the table?
I'm Claudia Mitchell, District 6 and Vice President of the board. And my question is very similar to what you just really answered, which was, what are your ideas about engaging families in the communities, particularly when they're inexperienced with participating or if they've had some type of negative experience with education? How would you deal with something like that?
We've got to create venues where they can become, folks from the community can be comfortable talking with district officials and district leaders. If those venues are established and they're not necessarily in schools, they're going to be far more comfortable with that. Again, I need to go to them. I'd be excited about going to a community center and hosting an event talking about the things we're doing in the school district. The last thing I want a parent to take away from a school district is the opinion that's placed on Facebook. I'll just stick a little insert here. I despise Facebook. But I think it's important when stories are told on Facebook, if it's not authentic, if it's not real, but yet that's what the parent takes away, that's a problem. And that's something we need to confront. So if I'm able to have those conversations, if we're able to have those conversations up front to be real and authentic in what we're presenting as a school district, that's going to give them an understanding of, one, what we're doing well, two, what we're not doing so well, and three, how they can partner with us to make it better. I also think that having those partnerships with parents makes a better experience for kids. I know I can only speak from my own experience. When my mom was interested in coming to school, I probably was a little more attentive and connected and and was able to do the things necessary to be successful a lot more. So those partnerships are important. But understanding not every parent can come to the building during school hours. So we have other options now. The one silver lining, if you will, from COVID is we became familiar with this platform called Zoom. Zoom has allowed us in Reynoldsburg to increase our attendance at parent-teacher conferences. When they were in person, we probably get, I'm going to throw out a number, somewhere between 20 and 30% would actually come. On Zoom, we were getting 60 to 75% of our parents engaged in conversations about how kids were doing in class. That's a win. If they can come home from work, log onto their computer, and simply have a conversation with their teacher right there in the confines of their own home, that's going to make them connected to school in a way that we never were able to do before. If I can connect them that way, great. If we can go out into the community and host an event at a church just to talk about programming in schools and things that we want to do, great. We will do that. But it also has to be a group effort. We need to have numbers of people doing those types of things because they need to know that they can trust not just the superintendent, but they can trust everybody within the school district to advocate for their kid and to create programs and venues for them to be successful.
Thank you.
Dr. Brown, I like the way you mentioned culture and climate. And so with leading with that in mind, one of the things we've heard from the community and parents is about discipline and safety. So if you would describe your ability to cultivate a disciplined, safe, and orderly school environment and support teachers in terms of discipline issues, how would you do that?
I think to begin, we talked earlier about classroom conditions. So how do we change classroom conditions so that they're more conducive to student success? That means we have to provide teachers with assistance as well to help create that. We need to be able to provide kids with resources that allow them to flourish in that environment and find out what those issues might be. And then at the same time, we're doing that within the classroom. That's going to spread throughout an entire building, and you change building culture in that way. There are certain things that are kind of non-negotiables. If we're talking about drugs, violence, weapons, those types of things, unfortunately, those are pretty cut and dry. We need to deal with those immediately, and we cannot be lenient, if you will, in regard to those things. But when we're talking about things like disrespect or disruption, all those things are a little objective. So how are we using the code of conduct to change behaviors? I'm a firm believer in restorative justice and giving kids an opportunity to make amends for something they may have done. Give them a sense of, okay, how did my actions in this regard affect the people around me, my classmates, my teachers, my school community? I think it's important that we get an understanding of that. When a kid is suspended for an action, let's say they're put out 5 days, and they come back to school 5 days later and nothing changes, that student hasn't learned anything. How can we bring them back into the fold by some type of transition conversation that allows them to understand what took place and how it harmed others? Maybe perhaps how it harmed that particular student. They have to have an understanding of what these behaviors do. I think when you address things from that standpoint and kids begin to see themselves show up themselves in the curriculum, they show themselves in the classroom, their personalities change, that comes in a way to help them deal with some of the issues that they're confronting. And I think we also have to confront that many of our kids, particularly post-COVID, are dealing with trauma, social emotional issues, mental health issues. So what resources are we bringing to the table to make sure we're able to address those needs? Are we allocating dollars to make sure we can put those things into schools on a regular basis? Counselors and social workers across the country, that's always an issue in schools. Are we ever resourced enough financially to make sure we have enough of those people in the fold? Those are things we have to look at. If a student is struggling with a particular issue, we want to be able to find that solution at school so they can be supported. Because if they're not supported emotionally, they're never going to perform academically. If they're in a situation where they're not accepted socially, they're never going to perform academically. So how we go about dealing with discipline starts at the root of that. And even with those offenses that may be a little more serious, even whenever they may come back to school, they still need to have an opportunity to have a clean slate when they come back in. And we treat them like any other student and giving them an opportunity to grow from that experience. Particularly post-COVID, I would imagine you may have experienced some of this. There's been a heightened sense of behaviors will look very different post-COVID than they did prior to COVID, and that's been concerning in some regard. But I think some of the programs we put in place in Reynoldsburg have helped in our district. So I'll give you an example. We created a 9th grade academy a couple of years ago because we saw that our freshman data was not very good. There were reasons for it. We put them in middle schools where they're in teams and they're supported, they have all these resources around them, and then we say, okay, now go to a high school and be successful among all these other kids with no resources. It really was not working. So we put that in place a couple of years ago for our 9th graders. Hence, post-COVID, every single one of our schools had an increase in discipline referrals except our 9th grade students. Why? Because those resources were put in place and they've learned some things along the way about self-regulations, about how to do peer relationships, how to overcome conflict. They've learned a lot of those things, and those things have been built into the curriculum. How can we spread that? Those are things that can help alleviate some of the discipline concerns. But honestly, there are some things that you have to address. That's just the bottom line in that regard.
Dr. Brown, I'm Lisa Keith. I represent District 1. And I want to make just a couple short little comments before I ask my question. First of all, I want to thank Erica for asking the follow-up question on how you will support teachers. And second, I just want to say, you know, your mother being a single parent, you are definitely a role model for success of people that represent single parent generation.
Thank you.
My question is a rather long question, so if I have to come back and repeat it, I only have one question, but it happens to be long. How have you held staff members accountable for student achievement while balancing the demands put on teachers? There's an A, B, and C to it. A is, how have you measured the staff's performance? B, what obstacles have you faced and how did you handle those obstacles? C, what measures have you used that are outside of test scores if needed?
In terms of holding staff accountable, one, all of it cannot fall on teachers. I think across the country, when issues happen in schools and kids aren't achieving, naturally everybody looks at the classroom and says, teachers aren't doing X, Y, and Z. That's not true. Teachers are doing all the things that they can to make sure kids are being successful, and it's on districts, superintendents, those who work below them, to provide resources and opportunities for teachers to grow and get opportunities to be successful. That's our responsibility, to support them in that regard. While at the same time recognizing sometimes poor performance, there are reasons for it. What types of assistance are you getting to make sure those teachers can be successful? The idea of an improvement plan and the evaluation process is supposed to help people improve. It's not a mechanism that's automatically a trigger for letting someone leave. So how we support them in that regard is crucial. We've got to use that evaluation process to allow them to grow. and understanding not every teacher is perfect. Matter of fact, not most are perfect. We all can grow in some regard. In our district, we talk a lot about being comfortable, being uncomfortable, meaning we can't grow in situations in which we're not doing something that's different from what we've already done. So even when we have good teachers, we want to somehow get them to great. Good is the enemy of great in many regards. So how do we grow them in that respect? You asked, in terms of performance, the improvement plans are put in place, and I would say in our case, with our district, probably 85 to 90% of our improvement plans result in teachers being successful. That's the way that's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be a mechanism to escort people out of the profession or out of districts. That's not what it's designed for. As far as obstacles are concerned, I think sometimes you deal with obstacles in terms of mindset. Sometimes people believe that they are perfect in regard to how they do the work. And it's important for us to be able to work with them and demonstrate that they aren't, and that we all have flaws. Certainly, if I'm willing to concede that I have mistakes or I have issues or flaws or what have you, then my cohort, my partner, should also be willing to do those types of things. So if we have that sort of asset-minded belief about, I have these strengths here that I can build on, but I know I need to also enhance in these areas. If we have that mindset, I think we can all grow together. So in dealing with, that's a major obstacle to get over. I think also sometimes, in Ohio in particular, sometimes unions can be an issue in that sometimes they protect teachers or even other staff members who don't necessarily deserve protection because they're doing harm to kids. That's kind of a deal breaker for me. When it's doing harm to kids, that's something we have to address. That's a no-no. We have to deal with those types of things. While at the same time, we've given supports, we've given professional development, we've given coaching, we're in classrooms. Those things have to happen as well. As far as measures are concerned, naturally, we look at test scores, state test scores. We also use an internal testing mechanism in our district called NWEA MAP. We use that to assess what we're looking at on a formative level. We use Panorama Ed to give us a sense of how kids are doing social emotionally and mental health-wise. And that data helps us to align what our resources look like, where we're putting the resources, and how we can help kids grow and improve. I think it's also a good conversation piece to have with parents so that they know the struggles that their kids are having. It's very easy to just sit back and say a student who might be misbehaving and just say, oh, well, he's misbehaving. Well, there are reasons behind that. What is the core issue that's driving that? I think those measures can give us a sense of what those issues might be and how we can better confront those so we can solve those problems and help kids get through those.
Okay, one follow-up, and it's only based on something that you said. Say you were the chosen one that we decided. You mentioned some testing that y'all did outside of testing, one of them being panoramic ed, which I haven't heard of. Okay. So could you bring something like that, since it tests the inner part and mental? Would you bring something like that to our system?
Absolutely, I'd be interested in doing that. Naturally, we want to do a needs assessment of what's already here, because I would hate to replicate programs or ideas. But at the same time, that has given us some really good data that drives the whole conversation about changing classroom conditions. We can look at kids who are not achieving or meeting the bar as far as test scores are concerned. But when I can look at a measure and it tells me that 65% of our kids say that they don't have a trusted adult in the building, that's a major issue that we can confront. This assessment gives us that data, and it's been very helpful in helping us make some decisions about where we place resources and what additional resources we need to find. I'd be interested in having those types of conversations because we know our kids are struggling with certain things. We don't necessarily always know what those things are. And how do we attack a problem that we don't know exists? We've got to be able to identify it.
You talked, I think Erica asked a question about getting families, it's Claudia, families involved in the community. This question is a little bit about that, about how you have engaged the community in your district and how you've increased the visibility of your school system and its needs within the community.
Talking earlier about the different types of venues I'd want to create so parents can have a voice at the table, that's first. That's crucial to have that happen. But in terms of what we've done in our district, one thing I haven't shared tonight is that 2 years prior to me arriving in Reynoldsburg, we were on strike for 2 weeks. And it was over a number of different issues that would probably take us all night to discuss. But what that created was a rift between the community and the school district. There were rifts created within the school district. So when I got there 2 years later, one of my charges was to restore trust. That means I had to talk with people on a regular basis, and I had to do what I said I was going to do, whatever that may have been. I think in terms of changing our story, the narrative, what people believed, it was important for us to do that ourselves. Prior to me getting there, social media was a no-no, like staff were forbidden from using it. And my philosophy has always been, well, despite what we might think about social media, if we don't have a presence there and if we don't tell our story, somebody's going to tell that story for us. Who better to tell our story than us? So we use social media to change what people talked about. We didn't talk about the issue that happened 3 weeks ago in Building A. We were talking about the instructional program, the literacy program at the elementary school that we got to go look at today. Here are pictures, here are images, here's a story about what we actually saw. So we use that to change what people thought about us. When I arrived, we also adopted a hashtag. It was Ren Proud, Reynoldsburg, Ren Proud. And I just thought it was going to be something that I used for my tweets just to gain traction. Turns out that became the mantra for the whole district, and everybody began doing that. The community began doing the same thing when great things would happen in the city. Hashtag Ren Proud. So when everybody begins saying good things and positivity about the district, it helps you deal with the things that aren't so good, the issues that come up that are difficult. I think it's also important to engage the media so that they have a seat at the table and understand you don't always have to come from negative stories. We got some positive stories for you as well. When I first arrived in Reynoldsburg, we were very purposeful of making sure I connected with those media outlets so they know we were accessible and open, and they help us tell our story. So many times something happens and the press will come and have a story about it. We were able to give stories to the press. They would call us and say, hey, what are you guys doing that we might be interested in? Why don't we go take a look at the STEM program at Herbert Mills STEAM Elementary School? Why don't we talk about our Hope Squad at the high school that's helping kids deal with suicide prevention? Why don't we talk about our girls' state basketball champions? Yes, my girls just won the state title, so I'm really proud of that. Let's talk about those things so we can get a better sense of what kids really do on a regular basis and not just the issues that may pop up from time to time. When I arrived in Reynoldsburg, probably my first month there, was shortly after the issues that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, when Heather Heyer was killed by the car that ran over her and the protests that took place there. And I told a story about that. Going to James Madison, which is right over the mountain from University of Virginia, I was there all the time. And I talked about how I wanted my kids to come to a space in my district where they felt supported, protected, and safe, and we were going to look out for them. Anybody was welcome. Anybody who comes into our district is welcome, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure they're welcome. That story reverberated simply because it was a story of openness. We weren't about excluding kids from the continuum. You bring issues to the table, you know what? It's our job to help you deal with those. You're welcome. So I think telling our story in a very different way helps us to alleviate some of those false narratives that tend to be out there.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Brown, I have an additional question for you, and it relates to if you were chosen as superintendent for Montgomery Public Schools, give us an idea of what your first 100 days would look like.
Very good. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to talk with as many people as possible, visiting every school, every department, working with parent organizations, civic organizations, community organizations, business leaders, and having conversations regularly across the entire 100 days. I think it's also important to begin looking at what our instructional programs look like, what resources are in place for those instructional programs. Do we have district-wide curriculum for literacy that everyone can benefit from? Are we aligned in terms of, does a third grade in this school look like third grade in this school? Do kids get common experiences? If you're like Reynoldsburg at all, we deal with a little bit of transiency where kids move from one side of the city to the other, which means they switch schools. Should they have a drastically different experience simply because they switch schools? I don't believe so. I think we need to have some commonality in many regards. While schools should be free to do some things that are new and different, there should be some non-negotiables that all of us do to make sure those common experiences are in place. We did in Reynoldsburg, we did an instructional audit, which told us a number of different things that we needed to address, from curriculum to assessment to how we dealt with shortfalls and resources. That gave us a lot of information, much of which we already knew, but now we had an independent document that allowed us to even do those things. Because when someone would say, well, why are you doing that? Well, let's look at the document. This is what the audit told us was missing, and this is what we needed to address. So I want to be able to make those decisions with data, not with just innuendo and rumor. We need to have information, salient information that allows us to make those types of changes. Those are some of the things I'd be processing over the course of the first 100 days. And then once you gain all that information, you've got to build a plan to be able to execute whatever needs to be done. If there's another iteration of a strategic plan that needs to be done, let's do it. Let's get the community together and get them a seat at the table to start talking about what that needs to look like. If we need to look at our mission and vision to make sure they're in line with the things we want to do, then let's address that. So I think those first 100 days are crucial, and they need to see me everywhere all the time. If I'm in this role, that's what I would expect to bring.
And just as a follow-up, is it safe to say you're data-driven?
Yes, it is, while at the same time understanding the data can be massaged. You know, for example, to talk about assessment, I'm a firm believer in mastery learning. So if a student, I really couldn't care less if a student understands a concept in September or March, just so he understands that concept. So if he demonstrates proficiency in March, should he be rewarded for getting in March? Absolutely, that's growth. So in that regard, data is something that we can use to help us improve what practice looks like, but it shouldn't be a death sentence for anyone. If that student demonstrates lack of proficiency in October, that doesn't mean he's going to look like that in April. That's our responsibility.
Thank you.
Hmm?
Dr. Brown, is there any additional information that you would like to share with the board? And followed up by, do you have any questions for us?
Okay. I would like the board to know I'm extremely interested in potentially being a part of this community. I was interested prior to driving down from Birmingham last night. I won't get into the travels. It was quite a day, but I got here. I was interested then. Today has only highlighted that, spending time with most of you, spending time meeting people in the community and having these types of conversations has only increased my interest. One can look at the history of Montgomery and automatically assume that that's the history everybody understands. But the fact that there's so much history here only drives, I'm a passionate person when it comes to history and telling it in its authentic form. What better place to do that than this city? It's amazing the level of history that's here. How can we give that to our next generation so they can understand and appreciate the sacrifices that people made before them, so that they can make the same sacrifices down the road for kids that come behind them? So in building community, that's something I would certainly want to be able to work on. I'm pretty enthusiastic, and I can think back on my first year in Reynoldsburg. I literally was everywhere all the time. Parents will say, well, how are you doing this? Why are you everywhere? I'm like, I just think it's an expectation. You need to see me in places. You need to see me, obviously, at board meetings in my suit and tie, having conversations in a formal fashion, but you need to see me at a football game in my hoodie and Jordans as well. I think that's important. Our kids need to see that. They need to be able to see themselves in me. And if I'm able to give them that vision or that model, so to speak, I'm not only going to be proud of that, but I'm going to embrace that as part of what my responsibility is. I've often talked about the fact that kids can't be it unless they see it. And I have always kind of pushed myself to be that model for kids that I needed. So if I could provide that, that's something I would be incredibly enthusiastic to do and would expect to be part of my responsibility. Just very excited about the opportunity and thankful to the board for even giving me this chance to have a conversation with you.
Okay, any questions for us?
I would like to get some perspective on what you, and I've read the profile and things of that nature, but just so we can have it with the conversation in public, what are some things you're looking for in a superintendent to come here and take it to the next level, so to speak?
We are looking for it to go to the next level. We have built a good base here. We've changed some things that have been very beneficial. We have funds coming in thanks to the community. We passed that ad valorem tax, and we are fully accredited. We have a lot of good things going here. But, and I'm just speaking for me now, I think looking at what the potential for each student is what I'm looking for. that there may need to be a few changes here and there, tweaks to have every child reach their potential. I'm going to open this up to the group here, certainly.
And Dr. Brown and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit today. I want someone, just like Claire said, we struggle in Montgomery with equal education. And I think that, you know, on your tours today, you and I talked about it, how going from a traditional middle school into a magnet school, the difference just walking in the front door. And you could see the inequality pretty much right off the bat in the waiting room, in the halls, in the classrooms, in the students, all of that. And so to me, the most important thing is the next superintendent. That is a priority to be able to, just like you were saying, you know, if you change schools, you know you're going to get equal education, and you don't have to go across town because that school is better or is perceived to be better, or they're better teachers, or, you know, I can't get into that school that really has something that I want to do. So that is my priority.
My priority are a couple. I've been on the board now for my second time and running for a third.
Good luck.
And this is not a put down on the current administration. I've really enjoyed, I've seen us grow so much in just the last 2 years. In areas that I didn't think we'd grow, and even in areas that I didn't support, that I'm really proud of. But I would like to know that the next superintendent coming in is not just going to take everything as is and work with it and just keep it that way, because I do think we need change in teacher support. We need change in a good many things from the top down. You know, in the central office area, I would just like to see change in that, and just somewhere to know that you didn't just come in and take what was going for granted and go, okay, let's go with it. I'd like to know that you went the extra mile and cared enough to be here every day. And some of the things you said, that you want to be present, whether you're in a suit or your Jordans and your hoodie. You've come across as somebody that I hope that you walk the walk of the talk that you're talking.
Thank you. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go on.
I was going to go on to another point.
Go on.
Okay. Just for the sake of the community that's present, I'm really excited about the opportunities the city presents, and having conversations with the part of the business community today. It's ripe for partnership and creation and taking things to the next level. I talked earlier about the kids in my district, where we had about 20 kids over the last 2 years who've been able to graduate from high school with an associate's degree in tow. That can grow. Those types of opportunities are crucial for kids to be successful and saves families so much money on college educations. While at the same time, we've developed pathways in our district that have allowed kids to find non-traditional, quote unquote, non-traditional routes to success. Not every kid is going to go to college, not every kid wants to go to college. But there's a success mechanism somewhere that they're interested in. How do we build on that to make sure those pathways allow them to go that way? That's something I'm very passionate about. You mentioned being present. Yeah, that's important to me. I want kids to know who I am. I don't want to just be the guy, oh, that's the guy in the suit. No. Oh, that's Dr. Brown. I want them to know who I am. That makes the work fulfilling. That's why we do this. And if kids don't know and have an opportunity to celebrate or be part of the work, then we're not really fulfilling the mission of what these roles should look like.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a few comments.
Sure.
I think that listening to you and taking my notes, I recorded at least 4 times that you said equitable. And that is very important to me. As Jana spoke, we should not be able to, we should be able to go into a building blindfold and not know where we are,
Yep.
okay? And it's obvious that that is not the case today. And so, you know, me and Jana and other board members, and I hope the whole board,
feel that same way, and that is important to us. And I just want to make sure that all of us are on the same page when it comes to that, because we are not concerned with a certain group of kids. We are concerned with all children.
Absolutely.
And if someone comes here and they are not on that same page, that's not the person that we're looking for. At least that's not the person I am looking for. And another thing that you mentioned that I captured as well, teachers, educators are is an important resource, and we have to support and provide the appropriate amount of support to educators for us to see the dream to realize through children that they are educating. And teachers deserve the support, and they deserve the truth about what's going on in the system. And they should have a recourse to take if something is not, absolutely right. They should be able to feel comfortable with you or whoever is leading to have that discussion. And, all discussions don't always come out the way everybody want them to come out.
Sure.
But at least have the discussion and let them know that you are approachable, you are real, you're a living person, and have those discussions. And I think that sometimes we're so caught up that the message is lost, and we forget about the key part of passion and compassion. And I think that that is key. That's something that's near and dear to my heart as well. And I won't talk all night, but there are a few more notes, but those are the things that are near and dear to my heart. The children, teachers, being equitable.
Yeah, I think giving teachers an opportunity to have a voice when they have issues to assert them, be they authentic or not. We need to have a listening ear. And if they're authentic, obviously we need to address them. Even with my union back in Reynoldsburg, when we do something that, as an administrative staff, that isn't conducive to what we should be doing, that's on us to change that. I don't need to fight that. That's an easy fix. But when we're doing something that's dedicated to making sure kids are being taken care of, those are some hills I'm willing to die on. Kids have to be taken care of every day. You mentioned equities. Just another example. We talked earlier with some staff at central office about special education. I'm a firm believer that when a student might have an IEP, our goal is to work with that student to resource it enough and to get that student up to where he needs to be enough so that IEP is no longer needed. Special education should not be a lifetime sentence for a student. It should be a mechanism to give them the sorts of resources and supports to get where we need them to go. So again, that's an equity issue also, and every district deals with it. Having kids who are there, they're labeled in second grade, and that stays with them until they graduate. That's not how that's supposed to look. So what are the things we can do to confront that as well? So when we have tough conversations about equity, I think it's important to understand that equity is not monolithic. It has a bunch of different tentacles, be it special education, race, ethnicity, economics, EL, gifted. All these issues deal with equity, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that. It's very multifaceted.
Thank you.
I think it's, number one, very difficult to sum up my expectations in just one or two sentences, but when you said that equity is not monolithic, you helped me a little bit because 90% of what I talk about has to do with equity and getting rid of systemic barriers, as said earlier, that we have imposed as a society or a system.
Yep.
But I am looking for someone to help us with providing equitable opportunities and the allocation of resources, looking at climate and culture that promotes high expectations, as well as providing access to achieving our goals. But one other thing that might seem minor, but is so important, I hope that we get someone who will help us to provide positive ambassadors throughout the community and change the stigma that has been put on children.
Absolutely.
For something that is no fault of their own.
Absolutely. When I mentioned telling our own narrative, that includes others being part of the conversation, because let's be real, a school district can't be successful without a good community and vice versa. Good communities are built on good schools. So when we talk about people telling our stories, it's our community telling those stories as well. You know, a kindergarten parent comes into a school and witnesses her child doing something amazing on the carpet in the classroom. That's a story we want to put on. We want that parent to tell. A business member comes in and works with a high school student in one of our career tech programs, and this kid is flourishing, doing well, and that company is really ready to hire that student as soon as he or she graduates. Those are stories we want to tell, but the entire community has to tell those stories. That means we have to give the community access to see those things come to fruition.
Thank
All
you.
right, we are at the end of our, well, we're at the end of our hour
Okay.
and the interview. I want to thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure meeting you, and we may see you again, we don't know. I want to thank the audience again for coming out. This is great. We want you to meet Dr. Brown. There will be a reception in the foyer, and we want to thank Carver Culinary Arts Program right here in this school. They have provided refreshments for us. A little shout out and thank you to the Chamber today for pulling together leaders in the community to talk with Dr. Brown also. So at this point, we are concluded with this interview, and thanks for being here. We will see you again hopefully Thursday night right here, and with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you again.
Tomorrow night must have been the night that Dr. Williams was supposed to be here, but she couldn't because she's in New Orleans. No, she's next week. Yeah. Just enjoy that. I appreciate you too. I think it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. I'd have to look back at Tuesday.
I like that idea. Thank you.